great.
It's very useful when you're cutting the shoes. You're switching lessons. Yeah, like 3 times an hour.
Wow.
Yeah, I think maybe like at 6:45.
Yeah.
I was trying my outfit at the store where I bought this dress, and the woman was like tying a belt. I felt similar to what's on Nicholas belt. And she's tying it. I'm like, no, don't tie her. She was like, really? I'm like, I don't really want to be like snatched. And she was just like, oh my god.
Really?
Yeah.
So she was going.
She wasn't. She was like very like.
Yeah.
It's just like, you're not serious. I'm like, no. Like, I like to snatch. Like, maybe when I go home, a little bit of business. Like,
Yeah, there must be Indians there.
yeah, I must have worked in this dress. She's like, oh, when I work here, I'm like, no, that's what I like. I like that. Keeps you upright, you know?
Yeah. No, it's good for your posture.
Right? It's like, actually,
I have such bad posture.
and I know she wasn't playing.
Yeah, you get like a stomach ache.
A natural one out of nowhere. All of us, When I was at university, I used to do experiments, so like social experiments, where I'd wear piercings, like a lip ring for 2 weeks. Oh, weird. Yeah, so I think that they like.
Hi, I'm Jabu.
Nice to meet you, madam.
Nice to meet you.
Hi, Danielle.
Deputy. Hi, my name is Jabu. Oh, nice to meet you.
I just
evening, everybody. If everyone at the... Oh, that's coming in. Can you please take your seats? We're about to start. Okay, good evening. My name is Aisha Waja. I'm the director of the project space, and I would officially like to welcome everyone this evening, especially His Excellency, the French Ambassador. We are really thrilled to be hosting the Night of Ideas with IFAS and our wonderful panel. So I just want to give you a little bit of information about the project space and who we are as an arts organization. We're a fairly new organization, which is why I think it's incredibly important for you to just to get to know us a bit better, because you're here in our very humble home. The project space is a creative organization centered on creating opportunities and spaces for artists and creatives, specifically female artists on the African continent and the diaspora. We were established in 2016 by Ugandan-born artist Benon Lutaya, and the organization was formed in response to research that was done in 2010 by the South African Department of Arts and Culture. For us, this is extremely shocking statistics that we found that stated that only 12% of full-time practicing visual artists in South Africa were women. And of that 12%, only 3% are women of color. So one of the things we really aim to do is to make a shift in the statistics. We understand that it's a really long-term process, but we are trying. So as an organization, we are geared towards improving opportunities for young artists through our programs, the Young Female Residency Award, whose recipients you can see the work of around you. And these are local South African artists, and then the exception of one artist, Stacey Jillian, who is from Uganda. So the artists on display are Alka Das, Anastasia Patha, Lebohang Motaung, Chriselle van der Merwe, and then obviously Stacey Jillian. So again, our programs, the Young Female Residency Award, the Women in Africa Residency, our Art Fairs and Exhibitions program, and the Entrepreneurs Residency. We believe that art and business are intrinsically linked. Thus, we are committed to building an organization within the creative and business sector that is self-sustainable and serves as an example for other organizations to create and implement sustainable social practice. This is partially achieved through working in partnership with local and international institutions and businesses. As the founder of the project space, Lutaya sees himself not only as an artist, but an entrepreneur dedicated to making a self-sustainable arts institution. The project space is an extension of his practice as a form of activism against the contemporary art landscape and the systems that hold it in place. Lutaya sees the organization as an interactive artwork constantly evolving to the needs of the artistic community. If you would like any more information, my business cards are at the back, and that has our website and social media information. If you're also interested in purchasing any of the work, you can speak to me after the discussion. Thank you so much for coming through tonight, and I would like to welcome His Excellency, the French Ambassador.
Thank you, Aisha, and thank you for hosting us tonight, and thank you for all that your gallery is doing. Sani Bonani, bonsoir, good evening. Thank you all for being here tonight on the occasion of this fourth Night of Ideas. Well, for the ones who have been following, in Joburg it's only the third Night of Ideas, but worldwide it's the fourth Night of Ideas. This is the third Night of Ideas in Joburg, and I'm happy to have been able to attend the three of them. So for me, it's even a greater pleasure. And I see that each time there's more people in the room, so I take it as a good omen for the future of the Night of Ideas. As you know, maybe the Night of Ideas is a project which was launched by France in 2016. And the idea is, in a way, very French. You know, everybody doing the same thing at the same time all over the world. We did it in France, and now we want people to do it all over the world, but in a very free way. And so the idea is that tonight, on the 31st of January, all over the world, in a way, people choose a topic for discussion, and they exchange very freely. You know, globalization cannot be just about the economy. It has to be also about the ideas, and it must make people feel free and express themselves. So basically, that's the idea. So welcome to a free exchange of views and ideas, and I'm very proud to be here with you tonight. But of course, each time there's a topic. So the world topic was facing our time. It was chosen by a kind of committee, anyway. So facing our time. And so then everybody chooses what it means more specifically locally. And this year, for South Africa, the very powerful people at IFAS chose the topic. And the topic they chose is feminism at work. And so, by the way, I want to congratulate the IFAS team for their work. Thank you very much. And so feminism at work means that maybe I'm not the one who has to speak too much about it. Although feminism and the cause of women is not just a women thing. That would be a pure denial, precisely, of the whole project and all that it means. But anyway, so it's clearly a key topic. Feminism is more and more not just a trendy topic, because it carries a lot of very serious things with it. So I won't be too long. I will just maybe introduce it by quoting, a famous author who said, "One is not born, but rather becomes a woman." Who said that? Just to check, if anybody still reads French authors. Of course, Simone de Beauvoir, in The Second Sex, Le Deuxième Sexe, on ne naît pas femme, on le devient. And that was published in 1949, so which means close to 70 years ago. 70 years ago. So you could be born right at that time, be a woman, and now reach a very senior stage of your life. Anyway, and it was written as something quite provocative, as you know maybe. This is not time for philosophy, but still, since we have very skilled and intellectual panelists, I think it will be food for thought. But it shows that, yes, things have happened since then. Yes, still things still have to happen. But clearly, the topic has been here for years and years and years. And we are doing progress, but a lot still has to be achieved. And this is why I will not mention all the campaigns worldwide that everybody has in mind now. But this is why clearly it was good for us tonight maybe to exchange on that. So, chère Fanny Glissant, dear Jaboulile, welcome. Dear Daniel, great pleasure to see you again. Next time it was the Alliance Française, but obviously you like it, so welcome, welcome again to something with the French cultural section of the embassy and the IFAS. Dear Nandipa as well, thank you very much for being with us tonight. So I said it was not up to me to talk, so thank you again and enjoy the discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. I'm very excited to have such great attendance tonight. I'm looking forward to a challenging, provocative, informative, thoughtful, and really textured sharing of ideas, and really want to make this space one in which we share with and learn with each other, rather one in which we just simply speak to you. I'm very, very excited to have a great group of panelists with me tonight. So I will start and introduce them to you. We have Nandipam Tambo, who was born in Swaziland. Her work addresses ongoing debates around traditional gender roles, body politics, and identity. She works in various different kinds of artistic mediums, and these include photography, sculpture, video, and mixed media to explore the boundaries between human and animal, femininity and masculinity, attraction and repulsion, and life and death. Next up, we have Jabu Newman, who many of you might know through her really popular web series, The Foxy Five. She's the owner of Ricochet Films, which is a production company based in Cape Town, creating and producing authentic stories about what it means to be a person of this era, and particularly a woman, and particularly a woman of color. and she has done many things and produced several films looking at the youth and subculture of South Africa. And then we have Fanny Glissant. Fanny is a documentary producer, and she has been one for a decade. She produces history documentary, but also arts and culture films, and at the same time writes and directs documentaries. And in 2018, she directed a 4-part series on slavery called Slavery Roots, which we will discuss a bit about today. Also myself, I am Danielle Bola. I'm the current managing editor of Elle Magazine South Africa, and also a writer. I'm very excited that we're looking at the topic of feminism at work. I think that we can all agree that we need feminism and feminists in all spaces, and particularly the workspace, as it is the space in which we find ourselves most. It's been proven that we spend most of our waking hours at work, so it really needs to be a space in which we feel included, seen, heard, visible, and in which we feel that our rights are respected and that we are valued as human beings with all the various identities that we occupy. So I guess the first question that I want to pose to everybody is just knowing that feminism has come to mean many different things, and there are many different kinds of feminists. And people have molded understandings over time of what it means to them. What is your personal understanding of feminism, and how do you relate to it? And I'll start with you, Jabu.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Jabu Nadia Newman. So great to see you all. I think for me, because we're speaking about feminism in work, I'll speak about specifically how I try to incorporate feminism into my work, but also how much feminism inspires my work. So the Foxy Five was the first thing that I'd written and created, and it was inspired by the Fees Must Fall protest, and it was inspired by the women, trans, and non-binary leaders of the Fees Must Fall protest, who were teaching me things about feminism and things about politics that university was not teaching me. So they were teaching me about intersectional feminism, which was looking at how you cannot separate race, class, gender, privilege, and even disability or ability. And therefore, when we're speaking about feminism, we need to speak about all the different types of people that have struggles within that. So for me, the Foxy Five was like creating and speaking about that and figuring that out for myself, and then creating work that was talking about it and figuring out. So obviously it's flawed, and at first my feminism was very flawed. I had a lot of things to learn, but through my work I learned that a lot.
I'll go to you, Nandipa. Thank you. I don't know if you can hear me. Is it? Yeah, thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming. Well, I think that I kind of sit in a situation where the question of feminism and how it's worked in my life is quite complex. Since a young age, I suppose, have had a complexity of life experiences that have put me in a space of the binary, you know. And so I guess the way that I work and the way that I think is about that in-between space where you don't really know which side of the line you actually are on, and sometimes you're straddling both sides. So I think when it comes to feminism and how it's kind of presented itself in my life, I never positioned myself as a feminist. It was art critics and art writers who looked at my work and decided that I was making feminist statements. And I think when I was a little bit younger, I had the kind of impulse to fight against it a lot and kind of resist the sort of boxing or the stereotyping, because I just think that sometimes what happens is that people use a particular way of viewing you or use a particular stereotype in order to be able to be comfortable within themselves about what they think it is you are doing. So in order to compartmentalize and in order to make things make sense to themselves, they have to put you into these boxes. And so I think, now understanding that there are different types of feminisms, and understanding that even within the broader spectrum of feminism, there are certain things that I agree with and certain things that I don't, has made me feel a lot calmer around even kind of sitting on a panel where this is our discussion. So I guess the long and short of it for me is that I think it's still a journey that I'm on. You know, I don't think that there's one specific way of looking at things, and I don't think that I have the answer as yet.
And Fanny?
Hi, first I'm super happy to be here to share, you know, experiences from friends and South African experiences, and so to share the likeness and the differences of our experience. So for me, feminism is like a discipline. You know, it's very difficult when you live in a world of discrimination to, you know, remove some stereotypes and discrimination that you embody yourself. So you have every day to think about it, to think the way you are seeing the others. And when you are in a powerful position, and when you are supposed to hire people sometimes, you have to, you know, think about also the stereotype inside your mind, you know, and think about that. So for me, feminism is discipline first.
And I think that's something that many of us can relate to. Feminism as a journey, as a thing you're still figuring out, that you're working through, rather than something is finished. Because I think a lot of the some understandings that are foisted on you is this idea of perfection, in the sense that feminists have it figured out. Absolutely everything, and don't struggle with and contest with themselves, and don't have to work through ideas. And I think that there's a thinker, Sarah Ahmed, who offers a valuable kind of lens, and the title of her book is Living a Feminist Life. So when we think about feminism then as a way of living, as a set of ethics, as a set of principles that help us to navigate the difficulties of what it means to be a person in this world, and a person particularly who lives on the margins of many identities, then that is a more instructive way to view it, rather than, I think it's quite a patriarchal understanding or sexist understanding that positions feminism or feminists as paragons of perfection, rather than humans trying to create a better world and trying to do it together. And I think that in thinking about that togetherness, I know that for myself, feminists have been, or women in particular, and feminists have been great mentors in the workspace. And I found within finding that kind of support has been really critical. Who in your careers, in your creative careers, have functioned as mentors for you? I'm going to start with Fanny.
Yeah, but it could be, you know, men and women. It's not only women. So, yeah, okay, some feminists were very important, and Simone de Beauvoir, but also Angela Davis, and also, I don't know, you know, Beatrice Preciado, you know, but I read a lot of French theories and intersexual theories, and for me it's very important. But also, you can get some experiences from men and from, you know, transsexual or bisexual. It's not only, sorry? It's transgender people, sorry. So it's not only, you know, you have so much fluidity between, you know, identity. And I think you have to be, you know, focused on the human being instead of, you know, focus on only the woman experience.
Jabu?
So for me, because I am a filmmaker, I watched a lot of TV and a lot of film, and I think that the women filmmakers and the women TV makers and the women characters were kind of my mentors and who I was inspired by. So things like Sex and the City, Girlfriends, Girls, and stuff like that. It was so super inspiring for me to see women on screen talking about sex, talking about relationships, talking about all different types of things. And when I was studying, I learned a lot about Laura Malva, and she speaks about the male gaze and how in cinema, you know, cinema and images are always created for the male gaze, for the male pleasure, and women are just used as ornaments in that. And then you learn about the Bechdel test, which is the test which sees basically how many films exist where there are two women characters who are having a conversation about anything else than a man. Most films don't pass that, which tells you that there are hardly any female characters. If they are, they never talk to each other. And if they do talk to each other, they're talking about a man, right? So I was inspired to make something that entirely consisted of the Bechdel test. So that's why I made the Foxy Five, which is women by women talking about everything else other than men. So I would say, yeah, like the women filmmakers, they've been my mentors.
I think as feminists, we hold the potential within the workspace of creating space for each other in very tangible ways. And I remember the first time I walked into the offices, my new offices, I walked into an editor's office and she said to me, I want you to know that this is your space. You need to cry here, you can rant here, you can do anything you want to do in this space, and I'm here for you and I've got you in this space. And for me, that was a profound moment coming from spaces that had been quite antagonistic in many ways, or patriarchal, or sexist, to have a woman stand up and say, I'm here. And I think that kind of mentorship can provide a really valuable instruction of ways in which we can create feminist workspaces. Who have been some of your mentors, Nipa?
Well, to be honest with you, I only had one, or at least one that made a really big impact on my life, and that was Jane Alexander. I think if I didn't have her, if I hadn't met her, if I hadn't worked under her, I probably wouldn't be a sculptor.
Thank you. I think that in the spirit of also not having it figured out, I remember being in a workspace and being confronted with the matter of harassment. And when I was confronted with it, I thought, but I'm a feminist. I should have an answer. There should be something that I know, or I know that maybe I should report this, but if I report it, what are the repercussions of reporting? And I think that one of the reasons that we held this discussion tonight, so one of the provocations, is the fact that many of our rights exist in law, or in workspace rules, or in the perceptions of what culture is meant to be, as opposed to the experience of a workspace. And I remember just saying to myself, okay, you actually don't have it figured out. Go and speak to some people and get a sense of how you could confront this. And I think that sometimes we think that we can feminist our way through and out of things when they're very challenging, and when we still exist in in spaces that are challenging for us from the perspective of just who we are, identities in space, the fact that workplace dress codes exist and tell you that you can't wear a skirt that's a particular length, the fact that you have to think through what it means to wear a specific kind of accessory. And I think that then it challenges us to think about what kinds of cultures are we making and perpetuating in workspaces. And in creative spaces, as we were speaking earlier, the gift that we have is that we often get to shape our workspaces, because we often work as freelancers or work in less corporatized structures. So I guess my question to you is, how do you try to shape workspaces that evidence a different kind of culture and a feminist ethics? Jab, I'll start with you.
I think that's so important to talk about, because when we talk about feminism and representation and putting women at the forefront, it's often in front of the camera, right? So it's on the magazines, it's the images, but it's not the people behind the camera making the stories, making the images, making the publications, writing and telling their own stories. So I think that is so important, is to find ways to say that it's not just about telling a story that hasn't been told, it's about getting the person to tell their story that hasn't been told and that hasn't given the opportunity to tell their story. And majority of that is women and women of color in South Africa. And I think that it's interesting how you also spoke a lot about like dealing with sexual harassment and how like in a workspace, you almost live in a dual complex where you have to also be so aware of your own safety and so aware of your own position as a woman in the workspace. So half of the time you're angry and you want to say something, but the other time you know that you don't have the power to change that as of yet, or it's more detrimental. So it's also about finding ways to like incorporate a feminist idea or incorporate more women into the workspace, but in a way that is not going to like just stop right at the door, but a way that gets it in there and then invites more and more people in.
Yeah, for me, what is very important is representation, you know, and represent the world as is for real, you know, because when you know that in medias and medias and newspaper, you have only 15% of all the image and photos and things like that represents women, that it's for me a real problem. And when you know that, you know, for all the articles and the films, you have 80% signed by men, it's also a real problem. And even you have some women working at this area, and media and information and digital, as many as men, I'm not understanding why you have such a representation, you know, so far from the reality. So for me, it's a first step. It's very important.
Nandipa?
Well, I mean, I think my answer to the question is that all of these things actually start at home. I think it's one thing to be speaking on how other people treat you or how people are treated within the workspace, but it all starts within people's private spaces, actually, and how we relate to each other, and the fact that even within the space of abuse, a lot of the abuse that happens to people happens within spaces where they are supposed to feel safe and at home, and with people that are known to them. It doesn't happen as often that people are hurt or abused by strangers, you know. So I think that because of this space of violence within the home, people then don't have an option but to then be violent or nasty or sexist or racist or whatever, because that's what they grow up with. And I suppose maybe as a person who's never really had a corporate job or been forced to work with other people, I spend a lot of time on my own, and I decide who I bring into my space. And so I suppose maybe this is why I have this thought around the home space and how that then creates the type of person that you would then deal with in a different context.
I think also when we tend to have this discussion, we can have it from a space of the other people do that, we don't do that, because we're better people because we're feminists. And the reality is that Bell Hooks' definition of feminism, within it she says, simply put, feminism is a movement to end sexism, sexist exploitation and oppression. By naming sexism as the problem, it went directly to the heart of the matter. Practically, it is a definition which implies that all sexist thinking and action is a problem, whether those who perpetuate it are male or female, child or adult. It is also broad enough to include an understanding of systemic institutionalized sexism. As a definition, it is open-ended. And I think that we can widen that to include people across the spectrum of gender as able to perpetuate these systems. So when we start to realize, if I think of your analogy of it starts at home being it starts with ourselves, how do you, in these discussions we can often be speaking about things like what is the problem, but not how do you hold yourself accountable when you find that you don't perpetuate feminist ideas or fall short of your own ethics. What are the things that you start to think through and the ways in which you hold yourself accountable? Jabu.
Wow. That's something that I'm definitely still learning and definitely still dealing with. I think that for me, it's always really important to be aware of my own privilege, to be aware about the opportunities that I've been afforded because of certain reasons, and to be able to know when is my space to speak and when it's not my space to speak. To know when it's important to bring other people to the table with other experiences and when you can learn from them and listen to them. I struggle a lot with criticism because obviously a lot of the criticism is about my work and I feel like I put all myself into my work, but it's also, I like criticism a lot because it means that people are so invested or interested in your work that they feel like they want to tell you how to make it better or where you did wrong. And I think that's like a gift that people take the time to do that. So I think that that's an important way to also hold yourself accountable, is accept criticism and see it as a place from someone willing enough to share their ideas with you rather than just leave you be and let you F up, so I would say that way.
And Nandipa?
Well, I suppose how I hold myself accountable is not being too quick, firstly, to use the image of anyone else within my work. I think that the space of the gaze is quite complex. And so being able to, maybe not being overly critical of oneself, but making the decision to put out there some of the things that I either don't like about myself, some of the things that I don't agree about that exist within me. It kind of gives me the space to think about how I then position myself within the world rather than how I would position somebody else. So I think for me that's the first step. And then the second one is, I suppose, being able to take criticism as well, and being able to, in a loving and open way within my own heart, listen to what people say about some of the work that I make, and not take things too personally, And I think the other thing is being willing to teach other people, because sometimes, we have these conversations within the context of just friends or colleagues where we're in a space where we either have the same politics or we have the same social standing, or and it excludes a whole lot of other people from the conversation. So I think that being open and willing to teach and also just speak to people that you wouldn't necessarily encounter in a social setting.
Thank you. And I think that there's a way that we can start to think about the relationship between the individual and community, both in our workspaces and in our feminism, and in the way that those two intersect. And I was once at a discussion of Pumla Qola's work where Kwezilomso Mbandazayo said something really profound, and she was speaking about when we're building spaces, and particularly when we're building feminist spaces, we need to build accountability in, and kind of, don't want to phrase what she said really badly, and I hope I'm putting it correctly, but we kind of plan for us to be human and to let each other down and to disappoint each other, and plan for structures that will hold each other accountable within that. So it's just something that I want us to keep in mind in our discussion going forward. And I want to turn then to the question of, if within the workspace, which is often a space of, there's a disconnect or a challenge in that, on the one hand, we find, particularly in creative workspaces, because there's smaller workspaces and there's less space for people, but the question of competition starts to enter our workspaces. And we're often pitted against each other for opportunities, for jobs, for the fact that we need
we have 3 roles to fill and we need 1 woman, we can't have many, or we need 1 queer person, we can't have many. And that creates an antagonism between people who would seek to support each other and who then start to, because of the way capitalism works, then struggle against each other and even struggle internally against the fact that we're struggling with each other. How do you then deal with that question of having to very really compete with each other for life-sustaining fellowships, opportunities, grants, jobs, and still hold your ethics intact? Fanny.
So it's not really the same in France, so I have to talk about my own experience. And before that, I want to, give you some few figures about what is France. It's the country of equality between human beings, human rights, and equality between, obviously, men and women. But also, what it's very important to say that in France, and it can be weird for you, but in France, race does not exist. What I mean, it's been, yeah, I think it's totally crazy, but okay, I go further. That it's been removed, the term, the word race, have been removed from the French Constitution last year. And it was a real big debate because for people like Caribbean people, it was, the national community was more aware of his colonial past, okay? And so because race, for deputy, was totally released to, Nazism and Hitler ideology and also, a racist theory from the 19th century. So in one way, it could be, very progressive, look like it's very progressive for France. But on the other hand, it was very complicated because it's bound, all the ethnical statistic and rating. So you don't have, the reality and the waste and the influence of the racial minorities. So if I say to you that you have something like, 2 million of slave descendants in France, it's just an estimate. I can't be sure because it's not allowed to me to give you, the right number because I'm not allowed to do it. So this kind of attitude puts, remain friends in kind of Utopia. Utopia, yes. Utopia. So for me, in my personal, work, I have to fight twice because I have to fight against, the hypocrite attitude that they say, okay, race don't exist, so you are just a woman. But I know I'm a woman, and I'm a black woman, and I'm also, a slave descendant. And so it's very hard to fight, It's not the same as you, so you have, BEE and things like that. For us, yeah? No? It's that? So for us, black women come from, former colonial empire. It's, very hard to find job, to find, good places in the society.
And I think what you're speaking to is the importance of context, understanding that in different spaces there are different kinds of things that we confront. And I think it also relates to what Jabu was saying earlier in saying that, there are many different identities that we have to think about. And I had read something interesting in doing this research. Lynn Williams said gender does not only happen when sexism or heterosexism occurs. Gender is not only an issue at work for queer people and for women. We need to be explicit about this in order to keep the discussion from being only about individual people's struggles and also include the politics and culture of the workspace. Which is to say, when we speak about gender at work or gender in general, people assume that we're speaking just about women. Or when we speak about feminism, we're just speaking about women, rather than as many
feminists have said liberation from the strict ideas of gender, what that means in the world, the stereotypes and the kinds of roles that we're meant to occupy, the kinds of things that we're meant to represent in the world. I'm going to return to my previous question to you, which was, because we were having such a productive discussion about it earlier, which is how do you deal with that question of competition?
So I'll speak a bit about like in the film industry and particularly in the commercial industry because that's where I'm in right now. So the way that it works is as a director, you have to pitch to get a job, and often when there's a job, they ask 3 directors to pitch. Usually it's all men that they let pitch, or there's only 1 woman that they let pitch. So in the industry, it's like there's only space for 1 woman director, and then there's only space, and then the other roles that they can fill is stylist and makeup artist. And maybe you're in it, like, you know. So even when you get onto set, I've been on set before where I'm directing something and people think that I'm the makeup artist. Or people think that I'm the stylist, and it happens to most women. And it's difficult when you have to compete because there is that one space. But I think that, you know, sometimes competition can be good because you're pushing each other to work harder, you know, you're pushing each other to create better work. But it's also choosing about when you're going to compete with each other, because like when women are invited to direct something, it's a tampon commercial. So sometimes me and my friends, if we're all asked to pitch on a tampon commercial, like time and time again, we're like, nah, get a guy to direct it because that's not all we can direct, you know what I'm saying? So, but I think that it's also really important to, you know, often as creatives, when we make money, we're in spaces that are dominantly male and dominantly white male, right? And we have to be in those spaces to make money. But I think it's also really important to collaborate beyond those spaces. So to make work that maybe is closest to your heart and that you have an opportunity to make something creative, work with your fellow colleagues, your fellow women colleagues, like get other creatives that are your contemporaries to be a part of your work and have them help you, and then you help them on their work. So that is that exchange where when it comes to our personal work and our personal creative stuff, let's help each other out. But when it comes to the money, let's compete and let's push to do the best work.
I think that it's also very important to keep in mind the idea that we're fighting for all marginalized identities and all marginalized genders in these spaces, and marginalized experiences in these spaces. But when you're doing that in the workspace, it can be exhausting. And I think often when we on panels like this or in discussions, we speak about the question of work-life balance. How do you have it all? How do you have a baby and also go to work? And that becomes the dominant idea. And I think that I hope that we're moving to a space where we're thinking about more pertinent issues of balance. And I think in particular, when you're facing struggles around identity at work, it can lead to a form of burnout. And I think that that's the balance conversation that we need to start having, which is how do you take care of yourself when you have to fight against these institutionalized ideas, which is to say these really entrenched ideas in the workspace where you spend most of your time. How do you look after yourself? And I'm going to ask this to Fanny first.
Okay, so I think 10 years ago, I produced a film called The True Life of Women. Yeah. And I want to show how it's a system. Okay? So being a good wife, a good mother, and the best at work, it's becoming, you know, like impossibility. You can't live like that. So you have to choose sometime to make a choice. And it's really, really difficult in our society to make a choice, maybe not to have children, and maybe not to have, you know, husband. But the first at all, it's understand the system. Okay, and the system is carried by a lot of people, herself, women sometimes, but also, sorry for that, but magazine and politics. Sorry for that.
Thank you for that.
But it's true because it's difficult to build up, a new image of ourselves, of what we are supposed to do and how we are supposed to do it. And to find your own identity, it's a real struggle. Yeah, just that.
And I think that we're all trying to work through this issue of what does wellness look like when we're trying to confront these things in the workspace. Is wellness, can I really do wellness when I'm waking up at 7 to answer emails and then go to the workspace and then come home, and if I have to look after a child, look after a child, or look after a pet, look after a partner, take care of someone in any way, and still answer emails and truly be well? I think that's a question that our generation in particular, but multiple generations are confronting, because this is what it means to be a person in this world, is to be linked to this all the time. And there's a really productive way that we've started to speak about unpaid labor. So ways that we do work in the world, and it's usually femme people and women who do this work in the world, where you're taking care of the house, you're looking after people, you're making sure people get where they need to get, and you're looking after yourself at the same time. And that brings in the question of what we've termed self-care, in all its variances, but something that we need to think about broader. How do we practice that in our workspaces, even if we work with ourselves?
Thank you.
It's okay.
I think that the space of having everything together just doesn't exist, actually. So just like you said, you do have to make a choice at some point. I realized that my work suffered. I decided to have a child. So my concentration and the way that I needed to deal with my life changed. So my work suffered. And so, not to say that I'm not happy to have the child, but I'm just being realistic and honest about having to shift responsibility, having to shift energy. And so I think that, ideally we'd all like to have the white picket fence, 2.5 children, and a cat and a dog. But I just think that you do have to be honest with both yourself and, I think more than anyone, yourself and possibly other people, about the fact that this utopia of all of that is honestly hard to achieve. So it doesn't exist.
But I think that in speaking about shifting the conversation, when we have these conversations, it's often about just the balance of, how do you have a child and go to work? And it's often just particularly women who ask this question, not how are you a father or a parent? And how do you deal with all these different kinds of things? And I think that you provided a useful phrase, which is not having it all, which has been locked in that malaise, but having everything together. And I think that that's something that we can all relate to, because it doesn't require us all to be parents, but there's an idea, an image, particularly in cities, of what it means to have it together, be the perfect worker, always answer your emails, always do the right thing. And we start to struggle against things like, do I nurture my friendships, or do I work and advance my career? And if I and it's something I had to confront in the magazine industry, which is very much on the go all the time. And I'm very much type A, so I was like, I will do it. I will wake up and answer that email at 11 o'clock, and really started to feel drained. But when you do start to take time for yourself, even if it be that half an hour to just pull yourself together and have a coffee or get out the office for lunch, often the perception of it is they're really slacking. That person really is not the one sitting here until 7 p.m., not going to consider you for the promotion, because you don't have the appearance of working And at one of my first jobs, somebody pulled me aside or pulled us all aside and said, you need to be seen to be working harder. And that was an interesting thing because it wasn't saying you need to work harder. We were all working hard. You need to be seen to be working harder. And I think that we can all relate to how that impacts our workspaces. And particularly if you occupy a marginalized identity, you often have to, as Fanny says, push even harder to be seen, to be noticed. And if you occupy multiple of those, you're running all the time to say, notice me, pick me, choose me, I'm here, I did that thing, that was my idea. And often fighting for that, which is why the matter of burnout and the matter of exhaustion and of even a particularly feminist exhaustion becomes an important thing to talk about. I'm going to let you all off the hook. Thank you very much, and we're going to open up the conversation. Again, want to start speaking to each other, having a conversation about this, sharing and learning together. So can we take a round of 3 questions? 1, 2. Okay, we're going to go to the 2 of you first. Is there a roving mic, or should I distribute mine? Okay.
Hi, thank you for the discussion. It's been very interesting. The one thing that has really popped up in my head is that currently there's this discussion happening around open up the industry. And I've seen, unfortunately, a lot of women in particular going at each other. And, you know, it's just been, I suppose, because more women than anyone else are the people who are then put into roles because of their sex appeal or because of how many followers, as opposed to the talent that you bring. And this crab in the barrel, like you said, competition with no ethics dilemma. So maybe you could speak to that, particularly, I think even especially in the creative industry, we have this open up the industry dilemma or problem or conflict happening.
Yeah, I think, you know, that makes me think a lot about like social media and how seeing people constantly putting out work and producing work can be so stressful for yourself when you feel like you're not doing the things that you want to do or you're not getting the opportunity. And you're like, yo, why aren't these people putting me on? Why isn't this woman involving me in their project or whatever? So it's like that form of competition, but in a bad sense, where it's also like maybe you're taking time to work money-wise and not creative-wise, you know? But the thing with open up the industry, I like 100% believe in that. And I know that even if we're fighting for smaller spaces, the more that you like work with other women or put other women on, the more they're going to do that for you. And the more that there is another woman in a position where you want to be, that means that there might be an opportunity later on for you because she's opening up that door. And I also think that like I've worked with all women crews and then crews with just a few women, and I found that the hardest working crew is all women crews because they really, really, really want to be there, and that's the opportunity that they get. So it's also, you know, we shouldn't be scared to be sharing resources, sharing contacts, sharing opportunities. If we find that we can't fulfill one job, like go ahead and recommend a couple of people. Don't just let them find other people. Recommend people that you know and congratulate people on their work, because people also really appreciate when they see, cool, we may be in competition, but you also recognize what I'm doing, and therefore I'll remember you next time something comes up.
Yeah. And I also think that there's 2 prongs to that. The first is that I often, when you're out somewhere and somebody says, oh, she's a feminist, people go, oh, why do you all hate each other? And, you know, my answer to that is always, okay, so we're raised in patriarchal, sexist societies that tell us that we have values based on specific things and tell us that we are not meant to like ourselves and each other, but then you're questioning why we don't like each other without looking at structure, looking at the society we live in, the society we all create together, the society that we inherited. And that starts to become something that we need to look at if we are in positions where we can open up the industry. But secondly, I think that you hit on something even in your question, which is that we need to look at how space is created. So what are the rules and then who gets to enter? When we start to look at that, then we start to question not only why we need to open up the industry, but why we need to dismantle its rules and rebuild.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak along the similar lines, but then something else has just come to my mind right now. But just going back to what you were also saying, talking around the idea of, I was just thinking that we sit and we deal with these stereotypes as well, with this whole angry WOC. And how do you find yourselves dealing with that type of situation, that scenario where you're like considered angry, you work in an environment where you're predominated by men, and what then? What do you do? How do you curve that?
Nandipa, do you want to take that? I don't know the shade that I get from this corner.
I think that we live in a system that has very specific rules. And we're all educated in those rules. Our parents are educated in those rules. Their parents were educated in those rules. And so the space of dismantling or kind of changing how people think or how they function is very complicated because of the fact that society and economics are connected with all of this stuff that we are kind of living in, you know what I mean? I think that it's difficult for people to want patriarchy to shift or change because of the economics of it, essentially. And so I don't really know how to even begin to answer that question because it's such a long and extended sort of historical drama. So I think that the problem also sort of continues because sometimes when we sit in these spaces of privilege, I mean, I'm speaking of myself as well, who's a person who, I mean, I have a home, I have specific things that are material that help my life work. Sometimes I forget that there are people who don't have that. So the space of educating or helping or even just like giving a piece of bread to somebody becomes something that I honestly forget. So in my own funny way, perpetuating this weird system that we're all living in without even thinking about it because it's such a part of how we all are. So I don't know. It's just such a big world question, I think. It's too complex. It's just, yeah.
Jabu, maybe you can speak to the creation of the character Black Beauty in Foxy 5 and what you were trying to think through there.
Yeah, so Black Beauty is basically each character in the Foxy 5 deals is like a stereotype on what a feminist is. So you have the angry black woman, you have the intellectual, you have the hippie one, you have the overly sexualized character, and then you have the character that's bossy and brings them all together. So these were stereotypes to show, and then these characters also represent a struggle within society, so race, class, gender, sex and sexuality, and then finally bringing it all together. So I created these characters stereotypes so that we could identify with them quickly and we could see how people view feminists, and then also break those stereotypes and see how these women are flawed, but they're also very complex. And Black Beauty is a character that is very angry. She doesn't want any white women to be a part of their group, and neither men either. But first black men before white women. And when I think about anger, I think about how it energizes me. I think about how important it is to be angry right now, especially when you have the energy. Yesterday we were at a meeting, and a much older woman said that she like she didn't have the energy to be angry anymore. And I completely understood that, and I thought, like, I want to be that person who's like, when I look back, damn, I was angry in my youth. Like, wow, I was just mad, hella mad the whole time. And it's like, that's important because then you're voicing your opinions. When you're angry, that's when you're voicing your opinions. And I fight at my work all the time with people, but I think that it's like, you know, it's also a way of conversing and showing that you care about something. And like, if someone thinks that you're angry, be like, yeah, I'm angry because I'm passionate about equality, I'm passionate about my rights, so therefore I'm angry. Yeah.
And I think that there's, just tacking on to what you're saying, that there's a way of first acknowledging that you should be angry. If you live in the societies that we live in today, you should be mad all the time. So if you are, it's righteous. And then to figure out your personal way of working through that and the way you're going to address things in spaces. So mine doesn't have to look like yours. The thing that I found helpful in dealing with when I'm really mad and I have to work my way out of the conversation is, firstly, sometimes I'm just mad. So I'm just angry, and I'm going to be angry in that space. Sometimes I'm like, I don't need to be angry, I can go watch Netflix. So you must sit here with your thought, I'm not responsible for that thought. And sometimes just choose your own self. And then thirdly, sometimes I think about, and all the time, I'm thinking about, who is this person, where do they come from, what is the space they're coming from, have they had access to the same kinds of knowledge and education and thinking as I have? And based on that, could I find a way to channel Michelle Obama, and when they go low, I go high in this moment? And can it become a space in which it's a productive conversation? And while those are rare, they're really valuable, particularly when you come from communities where people haven't had access to the same things as you did. They don't have the feminist education, theory, ways of thinking through the world, and they're surrounded by these structural understandings, so like sexism, racism, they're fed it. And the best way I find to think about it is just to think about all these things as air molecules that we consume and digest. So they're just parts of the world. So when I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking, okay, who is this person and how should I strategically deal with this conversation when I'm being Michelle Obama? We'll take 2 more questions before we're done. I'm gonna go. I think we're gonna have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we're done. Thank you. Sorry.
Hi, I'm Selena. The tricky thing with South Africa is that race is a big deal, but now, especially in corporate South Africa, we know the landscape and how everything goes. So the tricky thing with being a feminist is that sometimes you see women in powers, like in positions of power, but then these are white women, and the same women are still oppressive along racial lines. And this happens a lot, yes, you know, this happens a lot. So the tricky thing for me, and how I have a question about how you deal with it, is that how do you not take away the wins? Because having a woman in power is a win, but then having a woman in power who is racist and still is oppressive along color lines is not really a win. So, but then at the end of the day, you don't want to take away that win we have, but then that win is not really a win, it's a compromise in a way. So how do you balance being happy that at least we have a woman up there, but then as a black woman myself, it's not really, you see, like, that awkward balance between race and gender. So, like, how do you deal with it? Thank you.
I think let's go take the next question, and then we can answer 2 at the same time.
Hi, so my question is very related to Selena's, and I think particularly directed at you, Nandipa, how you are able to say that I did not say my work is particularly feminist, but people decided to compartmentalize it. And I think oftentimes we do that so that we can understand, or how is it that we relate to somebody's work. But, and I think to everybody, to all the panelists, do you often find that your journey with feminism and your understanding and learning and unlearning on this journey often isolates you from certain feminist spaces and certain people that identify as feminists, that you often find other people saying, but you're not feminist enough, or are you really feminist? So that's my question.
Nandi,
Thanks. I think. Why
are you not that excited for my questions?
I'm sorry. I think that these two questions have touched on such an important part of how I think about feminism, because the reality is that, yes, there's this broad umbrella of feminism and how we supposedly understand it through academia, but the reality is that, especially within the context of South Africa, that feminist word, the word feminism, has privileged and kind of helped the white woman more than anybody, actually. So as a black person, you're dealing with so many different sort of layers of how discrimination works. And I think that we have this issue of sort of glossing over things, So because we are all trying to be on some like Harambe, let's love each other, we don't speak openly and honestly around the things that are actually still problems. And so then it causes a huge ball of anger, which then kind of plays itself out in violence in the streets, violence in people's homes, violence. And so like there's this weird space of dishonesty that then causes like this pressure cooker of people being upset. And then we wonder like, oh, okay, why are we all so violent and angry? And, and so I think that my sort of issue maybe is that perhaps the sort of language around how we understand things or how we explain things needs to be expanded a little bit, because now there are people who explicitly call themselves black feminists. So now do you have to preface that with the fact that you're black in order to make the sort of separation of yourself from all the other feminists? So for me already that means that we have a problem, because the word doesn't fit everybody's situation, And so I think in terms of being marginalized, yes, I believe that I've been marginalized or isolated around certain things because I don't speak too much on the black issue. Yes, I happen to be black, and yes, I happen to be female. Yes, I'm making this work, but it's not the thing that's in the forefront. And so because I'm not speaking enough on being black and how terrible it is, or how, how, I don't know, disenfranchised I feel, then I don't fit into a particular sort of lens of how black artists are viewed. And then because I'm more interested in the sort of sex in between all of our sexes, I'm not really feminist enough, or, so I just think that we need to expand how we understand certain words and be very conscious of the fact that one word cannot explain a whole spectrum of how we all function.
Yeah, I want to say two things. The first one is two things. Sometimes when you are successful black woman, you have a double responsibility, and it's very heavy to carry because you're struggling a lot to become, successful and powerful, and you have, also the responsibility to be, like a model, like a label, like a, and I think it's very heavy to carry. Sometimes, you can be, too tired to do it. And it's my first point. And my second point, it's sometimes it's easier to be angry when you are well educated, rich, and you have access to, media. And so angry, it's how you say that? It's it's double-sided.
I think just to that first question, that we're going to always encounter spaces where we're discriminated against on aspects of our identity, and race is a very real one. And I think it's very difficult to speak to how to deal with it, because often it's aggressions that aren't overt. So I'm not overtly being racist, I'm being subtly racist in these multiple different ways. Resonating. Or subtly homophobic, subtly queerphobic. There are these subtle things that operate. And the problem is that you can't put that in an email. And work is the space of putting it in an email. And in encountering kinds of things like that, I'm always like, procedure, hey? When you can put it in an email, document that thing. And find ways to protect yourself in spaces. Learn people's thinking and learn how to step in front of it. So when people think they're going to catch you, they don't catch you. And the problem is that it places a lot of responsibility on us in workspaces that we're not responsible for creating these spaces, but we need to keep ourselves safe and keep ourselves employed. Also find support in your workspace. And find ways of finding people who could give you that kind of support when you find that you're coming up against discrimination of those kinds. I don't think it's easy to deal with, and I don't think they're neat answers, and I wish you could put it in an email all the time, because it would make it much easier. And the second question, in dealing with the thing, is to always know we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of feminism, and we're going to. So there's always going to be a day, a space, and a time where I'm not feminist enough just for myself. But I think that it's a personal journey. You have to be accountable to those ethics, to those group ethics. But you also have to be gentle with yourself at the same time, and find where those things meet and intersect. I don't think there's an easy answer.
I think that also specifically when we're talking about feminism, and there's like living in a country like South Africa where race is such a big deal, the experience between women of color and white women is vastly different. Therefore, white women shouldn't claim that they know our struggles and can speak feminism for us or know what we need. We have to speak that for ourselves, just like how we can't speak that about trans, non-binary, or gender fluid people. So there's lots of times when I don't converse with white feminists because their struggles are completely different to mine, and their ideas of what it means to be feminist is completely different to mine. So it's also about understanding, like we always said, there are so many ways of being feminist, and there's ways of understanding, like, just because you don't live your life the way that I do doesn't mean I'm not a feminist because you see yourself as a feminist. Yeah.
The last two questions.
I think I have a comment. I have two comments. The first one is like, the angry black woman has a specific image, especially in South Africa. The darker your skin, and then when you get angry, you are bitter, you're all stuff. That's the first comment. The second comment is in terms of Nandipa's work. And I feel like for you to say that sometimes you excluded from those spaces, I feel like it's something that, I think maybe, let me speak in the context, in university, that's the first thing you are faced with, you know. Let me give an example. Like if a black female student is making work about the sky and how blue it is, for some reason she always has to contextualize it, like under which sky are you in which country, you know, it always ends up in your blackness. And I feel like for, speaking as a young black female, to make work just about the sky just about how blue it is revolutionary, in my opinion. Like, we don't all have to speak about race. We don't all have to speak about feminism. Even just the act of being, you know, for me, is revolutionary, especially for people of color.
No, it's a very short answer. I think that the reason... Oh, thank you, actually. Sorry for your comment. Thank you. I think that the reason we don't have the Me Too movement coming on as strongly as other places is, because how... I mean, even it's been in the media recently as well. How people are getting jobs in this moment is through sexual favors. So I was shocked that there's even, I think it's called a hockey club. Have you heard? People. So anyway, there's apparently, I think it's called a hockey club. So you are targeted as a person who works in a corporate space. I guess you're targeted by your boss or him and his wife. And so in order for you to get a little bit further within your career, they basically invite you to the hockey club. And so at this hockey club, apparently there's like an exchange of sexual favors, and you either get a promotion within your job, or you get a Louis Vuitton bag, or whatever. So it's just become part of people's culture around getting ahead, unfortunately. So I think that what it boils down to is the fact that we just live in a very violent space where people's bodies and how we even understand our own body politics is just really complex and not in a space of like an open love for oneself, I guess. You know, I think we're just in a very violent moment.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, don't know if I agree. I don't think that I entirely agree, because I think there's a whole range of factors that come into it around, yeah. I think that it actually, there's a whole range of things that I can't speak to around that, because I'm not firmly in that industry. But I do think that Me Too was a very big moment on my timelines. And I think that a lot of people that I surround myself with are in the creative industries. And I don't think that we had people who were held up as the people who perpetuated it in the same ways, but it did happen here. We did speak out, and people did share their experiences.
But what are the consequences of powerful people falling as a result? That's the part that
Let's have one last question.
Hello. You know what, to answer your question, working in the film and TV industry, it feels as though we don't have as many support systems and just spaces where you can go to report the sexual harassment. And people are afraid of speaking out about it because, yeah, you're afraid of losing your job, you're on set, the contract is limited, you don't want to, you don't want to kind of like sacrifice yourself and your opportunity to work because of something that you've witnessed or because of something that has happened to you. But at least we have, platforms like Swift that are there, that have created the opportunity for women to anonymously, report, and that will support women in that regard. And yeah, that's really the reason why I think it's difficult for people to deal with the sexual harassment like really well, because people are afraid to speak out about, that abuse in those spaces. But yeah, we have Swift, so yeah.
Thank you so much. We are going to continue the conversation over some drinks. Thank you so much for participating. Thank you so much for your questions, for your attention, for your energy.